Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into this Israel-Hamas ceasefire.
Yeah,
It's pretty fragile, and there's a lot going on,
right. A lot to unpack.
I'm sure. So, you've all been following it pretty closely.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I know. And, one of the things we really want to look at today is this hostage situation.
Absolutely.
Because it adds a whole other layer of
Yeah.
tension, right, to an already volatile situation.
It's a really heart-wrenching element of all of this. And when you looked at stories like the Bibas family.
It's terrible. The Father
Yeah.
Garden was released earlier, but
Yeah.
his wife Shiri and their two young sons, Kefir and Ariel, their bodies were just returned by Hamas.
Yes.
And it's just such a stark reminder of what's at stake here as we, kind of try to figure out, is this truth?
Yeah.
Is it going to lead to lasting peace? Can this actually happen?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We're in what's being called Phase 2 right now of the ceasefire,
Okay.
which started on January 19th. And it's been a delicate dance so far, with hostages being exchanged for prisoners in these different stages.
Yeah, I mean, 19 Israeli hostages have been released.
Right.
Over 1,100 Palestinian detainees have been freed.
Uh-huh.
But there's still a lot we don't know.
Oh, for sure. There's so much uncertainty around the remaining hostages.
Yeah, like how many are there? We don't even really know.
Exactly. Hamas hasn't given us a specific number, which is
Right.
just fueling that anxiety.
Yeah, and Israel believes there's still 58 unaccounted for.
Yeah.
And a tragic estimate that 35 of those
Yeah.
are already dead.
It's a very grim picture.
It is. And then you have this unexpected development, right?
Yeah.
Hamas comes out and says they're going to release.
All remaining hostages.
Yeah, all the remaining hostages in one swap.
In a single swap during this second phase.
During phase 2, I mean,
Yeah. It raises so many questions.
what are they doing?
What is their end game? Is this
Yeah.
a genuine commitment to peace, or is this a calculated strategic maneuver?
Right. And so a senior Hamas official, Tahar al-Nunu,
Yeah.
said that this offer is meant to show their commitment.
To a peaceful resolution?
Yes. But actions speak louder than words, right?
Absolutely. So how do we interpret this in the context of, their wider political goals?
Right. And I mean, speaking of, other actors in this whole thing,
Yeah.
the United States obviously is a major player, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio just visited the region.
That's right.
And people are wondering, does this mean the U.S. is going to,
Increase their support for Israel.
yeah, for Israel's hardline stance?
Right.
Could that happen?
It's a possibility, for sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely on the table. But we also have to remember the immense pressure that Hamas is under right now.
Right.
I mean, according to Mohammed Shahada, who's an expert on Palestinian politics at the European Council on Foreign Relations,
Okay.
he's saying that Hamas's primary goal right now is to prevent the war from starting again at any cost.
They just want to stop the fighting.
Exactly. I mean, they're facing this devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza,
Right.
and they're really aware of the potential for even greater losses if this conflict starts up again.
And the losses have already been enormous.
They have extended.
Over 48,000 Gazans.
Most of them civilians.
Mostly civilians have been killed since Hamas's attack back in October, on October 7th.
It's a horrifying statistic.
It really is. It underscores the human cost of all this.
Human cost is immeasurable. Absolutely. And we're not just talking about the immediate casualties. We're talking about generations that are going to be dealing with trauma from this infrastructure is destroyed.
Yeah.
And this society is facing this immense task of rebuilding.
It's just unbelievable. And even within, these efforts that are supposed to be about a ceasefire,
Yeah.
we see these incidents that really highlight the tension.
A deep tension.
Yeah, 5 Israeli soldiers were recently charged with abusing a Palestinian detainee during the conflict.
Yes.
And it's a reminder that even when negotiations are going on,
Even when there's this effort to move forward.
yeah, that animosity,
But distrust.
the distrust is just bubbling under the surface.
It's always there. It's a microcosm, really, of the larger problem here. While we see these little glimmers of hope with the hostage releases and prisoner exchanges,
right.
that fundamental question of Hamas's future
Hamas's future.
remains a major obstacle.
Because Israel's saying,
Israel is pushing for the dismantling of Hamas's governance in Gaza.
yeah.
And that's something that Hamas absolutely rejects.
It just seems like, how can we even talk about peace when the two sides are so far apart?
It feels like an impasse. It really does. To get to the bottom of this stalemate, we need to look back at the history and all those deeply rooted grievances on both sides, the complex political landscape that has shaped this conflict for so long.
It's just such a mess.
It's a tangled web, for sure.
You're right.
Right.
It is. It's a tangled web. I know. I've been trying to wrap my head around it too.
Yeah.
Where did this all start? How did we get to this point?
Well, let's start with Hamas.
Okay.
They emerged in the late 1980s during the First Palestinian Intifada.
Uh-huh.
And they've always believed that armed resistance is a legitimate way
Right.
to achieve their goals.
Yeah.
And their actual charter calls for the destruction of Israel.
Right.
And for a lot of Israelis, that's just like impossible to even comprehend.
It's a non-starter.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have on the Israeli side the trauma of repeated attacks,
Uh-huh.
the fear of terrorism, just this deep sense of insecurity.
Yeah.
And you also have, a significant portion of the Israeli population that sees the settlements in the West Bank
Right.
as essential to their security and to their historical claim to the land.
And that's a key point, their historical claim to the land. It's vital to understand that both sides feel like they're the victims here,
Yeah.
like they've been wronged, and that the other side is completely illegitimate.
Which makes it really hard to find common ground.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even begin to imagine a future where they can coexist peacefully when you have those two perspectives?
Like they're traveling this cycle.
It is a cycle.
Of pain and just revenge.
Retribution.
Yeah. Each act of violence just justifies the next one.
That's a powerful way to put it, to break that cycle.
Yeah. How do you break it?
You need a fundamental shift in how people are looking at this.
Okay.
You have to move away from this idea that it's a zero-sum game,
Right.
where one side wins and the other side automatically loses.
So what's the alternative? What does a different approach look like?
You need to look at it as a win-win.
A win-win.
Yeah, where both sides can benefit.
Okay.
So you have to start by recognizing that both Israelis and Palestinians have legitimate security concerns,
Right.
that they both deserve self-determination,
Mm-hmm.
and that in the end, their fates are really tied together.
But how do you get from this, deep animosity to understanding each other and respecting each other? I mean, it seems
It seems impossible.
impossible.
Especially right now with what's going on. But I don't think it is impossible.
Okay.
I think we need to look beyond the political leaders
Yeah.
and go beyond those headlines.
And focus on the human element.
Exactly. There are so many stories of Israelis and Palestinians working together,
Really?
building bridges and understanding each other more through conversations, cultural exchanges,
Interesting.
even joint economic ventures.
You don't really hear about that.
You don't hear about that enough. They're really important, though.
Yeah.
They remind us that peace is more than just a piece of paper.
Right. It's more than just words.
Exactly. It has to be lived. It has to be built from the ground up.
So it's not about ignoring the differences.
No, not at all. It's about acknowledging those differences and those grievances,
Right.
but finding ways to work through them
Okay.
through dialogue and compromise.
But there are people who benefit from this conflict.
Oh, there are powerful forces on both sides
Yeah.
who benefit from all the fear and the division.
Right.
They want things to stay the same.
So what can you do about that?
That's where the international community is so important,
Okay.
especially countries like the U.S.
Right.
We need them to put pressure on both sides
To negotiate.
to reach a settlement,
Uh-huh.
to hold them accountable when human rights are violated,
Right.
and to support those initiatives that promote peace and reconciliation.
So, all right, let's talk about this truce, this ceasefire.
Okay?
Do you think it's a real opportunity for progress?
I mean, is it going to lead to lasting peace, or is it just a pause? I think the fact that they even agreed on a ceasefire
Right.
shows that there's some hope,
Okay.
even if it's fragile.
Okay.
And those prisoner exchanges,
Right.
especially Hamas, offering to release all the hostages,
Yeah.
suggest that they're willing to come to the table
To talk.
to at least explore options.
Okay. But Israel wants to dismantle Hamas.
That's a huge obstacle.
It is. How can you reconcile those two positions?
It's a major sticking point. But negotiations are all about give and take.
Right.
If they want a lasting peace, both sides have to be willing to make concessions.
But what would those concessions look like? What would a compromise even look like? I mean, it seems like an impossible situation.
Yeah, incredibly complex.
On the one hand, you have Hamas. A lot of countries call them a terrorist organization.
Right.
And they're saying Israel can't exist.
Yeah.
And then you have Israel, and they're worried about their security, and they believe they have a right to the land.
And a historical claim to the land as well.
So how do you even begin to bridge that gap? It just doesn't seem possible.
It's going to be tough, but there might be a path forward.
What do you mean?
Well, it's a really sensitive topic, but it might involve some kind of power-sharing arrangement in Gaza.
Power sharing between Israel and Hamas.
It's a long shot, but it wouldn't be easy, obviously.
No, I mean, both sides would have to compromise a lot.
A lot.
So what would that even look like? Would Hamas have to say they won't use violence anymore?
That would definitely be a part of it.
And would Israel have to ease up on the blockade on Gaza?
Those are the tough questions that would need to be discussed.
Yeah.
Any agreement would have to address the needs of both sides.
Right. It couldn't just be a win for one side and a loss for the other.
Absolutely. It can't be seen that way.
Okay. But let's be honest here.
Yeah.
There are people on both sides who would never agree to a compromise.
You're right. There are hardliners who are going to oppose this no matter what.
How do you get past that?
Well, that's where the international community comes in,
Companies like the U.S.
especially the U.S. They could play a major role here
Oh.
by encouraging cooperation, offering guarantees,
Okay.
maybe even acting as a mediator between the two sides.
But hasn't the U.S. always sided with Israel?
They have historically, yes,